day, September 17th. In a 12-hour period, there are 23,000 men killed and wounded. Nothing in America's experience could possibly compare to it. Nothing has compared to it since. What you will often hear people say is that Gettysburg is really probably the most famous battle of the Civil War. To some extent because of how many men are killed and wounded, but also because of what Lincoln ultimately does with what happens at Gettysburg and through the Gettysburg Address. And so by the time September 1862 comes around, and then Gettysburg comes around, with so much loss of life, so many men killed, wounded, how the communities at home are reeling from this. There is no one in the United States, no one in the North, who is unaffected by the Civil War. One Civil War historian of Connecticut wrote that during the Civil War, from the first firing at Fort Sumter to the Peace at Appomattox, Connecticut looked like an armed camp. Constantly soldiers coming and going, supplies being prepared for the war, wounded men coming home to be cared for, dead men coming home to be buried. The government was not prepared for how long the war would last or what this war would actually mean. Civil War historians have been using the number for about the last 100 years of 620,000 who were killed during the Civil War. This is, of course, is North and South, one of the reasons that the death toll is so high. You equate that with numbers today, for our population, the percentage of the population, it would be 5.9 million. That gives you some indication of why this war has stuck with us in a way that perhaps no other war in American history has. Historians, most recently in 2011, have rewritten these numbers. A very, very good study by a historian named J. David Hacker, who came forward and very extensive research into a wide variety of archives, but especially into census data. And he said, you know, that 620,000 number, it's not right. The proper number is anywhere between 650,000 and 850,000. And he said, we're never going to truly know. And these are just the soldiers. These are not civilians. We're never going to handle on the number of civilians. He said that we can't really figure out what it is. So let's just split it in the middle and say 750,000. A full 20% increase. And let me tell you, historians are a mighty skeptical lot. We don't like to change our numbers or what, how we look at history very easily. We really need to have it proven to us. And Civil War historians have accepted this figure. And so this is closer to around 8 million people killed in the war. This is why this war resonates so much with us. This is why we have the beginnings as a result of the end of the Civil War with the development of a national cemetery system, which Gettysburg is. We have so many Civil War monuments that dot our landscape, not just nationally, but in each of the states. Connecticut itself is home to over 150 Civil War monuments. We have what is, without question, the oldest permanent Civil War monument in the entire nation, which is located at the Kensington Congregational Church in the Kensington-Berlin area of Connecticut. We just put it on the National Historic Register, and it is now recognized as the oldest monument, meaning that it has never been moved from its original site. We have one of the oldest Civil War soldiers that was carved from brownstone in the entire nation, created sometime between 1866 and 68. So this war is not just about what occurs during the war, but it's about what occurs in the aftermath of the war. And Abraham Lincoln fully recognized this. He was a man that had, Mr. President, a tremendous vision. Recently, if you saw the movie Lincoln, the screenplay writer for that, Tony Kushner, gave a talk that I attended, and he described Lincoln in this way. He said, Lincoln was one of those men who was one in a generation. They don't come along very often. And he said, Lincoln could see things in politics and see things nationally the way that Mozart or Beethoven saw music. They didn't just sit down and study it. They literally saw it. And I think it was a very apt way to describe Lincoln and his effect on people. And of course, Lincoln at the time of the Civil War is tremendously controversial, not just between Southerners and Northerners, but among Northerners as well. And so when he gets to 1863 with Gettysburg, this tremendously important battle, this is only the second time that Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia have crossed over the Potomac and attempted to take Northern territory. And this is very, very strategic on Lee's part. Lee is a political thinker as well as a military thinker, and his goal in invading Pennsylvania, just as his goal in invading Maryland for the Battle of Antietam, was to impact Northern public opinion. And we know this about history. We know that wars cannot be fought if the public are not behind them. We've learned this from Vietnam, most certainly. And Lee's goal is to spur the anti-war movement that exists in the North. He wants to feed his bedraggled troops on Northern supplies, and he wants to carry the war to the North. And he believes that if he can be victorious in Pennsylvania, that he could potentially win the war politically, not militarily. It's a very smart move on his part. He fails. He goes to Virginia. He believes that his troops can be victorious no matter what, and even against the advice of some of his generals, especially Longstreet, he carries forward this battle over 3 days against an entrenched enemy that has the higher ground. And the Confederacy, the Virginia Army, the Army of Northern Virginia, fails, and they retreat back across the Potomac. I think pretty much everybody recognizes that this is the beginning of the end for the Confederacy, though they still hold on for another 2 years. And they fight hard. But Lincoln is the one who sees the changes in the war, and Lincoln's thinking about many things evolves over time. How he's going to fight the war, what the meaning of the war is going to be. And I think very importantly, and I'll tailor off here, is that Lincoln does not begin this war as an abolitionist war to end slavery. The war becomes signally about slavery. And he realizes that in order to win the war, he's going to have to destroy slavery. But he comes to this in the midst of the war, not at the beginning of the war. And so, in the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Antietam, he issues his preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. And he throws it out to the South and says, end this war now and we won't affect slavery. But let this war continue. And starting on January 1st, 1863, the slaves will be freed. He then utilizes Gettysburg, months later, to reaffirm his conceptions about what the meaning of the war is. And what he gets to is, it's not just about freedom for African Americans. It's also about freedom overall for white Americans as well. And it's about the challenge to maintain a Republican system of government, meaning a representative system of government. And he asks people the question. He puts forth the question, can we continue this nation of the people, for the people, by the people? Can we do this? And I believe, very much in the idea that we are still in this struggle today, that our nation is still an experiment in self-government. Can we continue to rise to that occasion? Can we keep that idea alive? And Lincoln most profoundly said, we are the last best hope of Earth. And as a result, the Gettysburg Address, with these ideas in mind, has become truly one of the seminal documents in American history. It shifts American thought from the Constitution to the Declaration of Independence.